I had something that was partially written and I pulled that out and I thought, yeah, this will make a good short story. It'll be nice and creepy and stuff like that. Problem with it is it wasn't creepy. I didn't know where it was going. It was just stalling out and stalling out. I went out with a walk with my husband, Sean, and I said, I might have to scrap this story. I really want to write something about Halloween. I've never written a story about Halloween, but it's got to be fun. It's got to be quirky, and it's got to be horror. It's got to be gruesome. The first thing that came out of his mouth was, every day is Halloween. I'm like, huh? And he goes, the Ministry song. And I'm like, oh, noldy but a goodie. So as soon as we got home, I sat down at the computer and I pulled up the video on YouTube for Every Day's Halloween by the Ministry. I pulled up the lyrics and I was studying the lyrics. I thought, I can do this. And this is where I took the song and just gently twisted it. Because in the song, you have someone who is dressing like the monsters in the world that he lives in to get through, just to survive. And I like that, the subverting of Halloween. Generally, Halloween is a time to act out the shadow sides of our psyche. This is a different type of masking. I can write about that. I have life experience when it comes to masking for survival because of being different, just being a little bit different up here with the way I see things and the way I process things and also what I value as well out of life, which is not something I'm going to go into here, but it's just been something I'm been aware of, and it's been something my closest friends have been aware of. Yeah, I can write from experience. I can do this. And that's what I did. And that's how the short story started. And oddly enough, it started with tulips. It was that impulse. And I just started with the tulips and went from there. Originally, the tulips, to me, just to give some context about the story, is that the story starts in spring. And I thought it would be a really nice contrast to start a Halloween story in spring and have it end in the month of Halloween. Eventually, I did that and then went a month beyond. But originally, those flowers, when I think about spring and what's so representative of life, the vibrancy that comes with flowers when they first come out in spring after a long winter, I thought, she needs to be cutting the heads off those to appease the dead, because the dead are offended by anything that presents as living. That's one of the reasons why people who are alive are going around wearing costumes all the time, and why it becomes law. It's an act of safety. There's actually laws in effect. People have to wear costumes every day if they go out in public. That particular thing is took that premise and made it a little bit different from everything else.
Really is such a unique take on this, and maybe some people might think of Halloween as being terrifying and scary. Of course, horror lovers, for people like you and I think people watching this, it's comforting. Like you said, we get to put on the mask, we get to represent our shadow self in a sense, but there's also a lot of fun with that too. With this book, there's not a whole lot of fun necessarily going on. There's certainly some hope in there. There's some, we see a collaboration in a sense between the living and the dead, but at the same time, thanks to your primary character in this, Esther, there's also just a sense of loaning and sadness that carries through it all. She just wants to be her own person. She wants to put the mask on and blend in with everybody, but she's also desperate to be noticed.
Well, it's difficult. Esther is 15. And it's difficult at that age. And I felt for her because I was that teenager who wanted to be out there, but didn't want to deal with the repercussions of being in the spotlight all the time. And then also appreciated being able to withdraw and be a wallflower, even if it meant nobody noticed you. And there's a reason why I dedicated the book the way I did, but it's dedicated to anyone struggling to be seen. This story, I found, gave me an opportunity to talk about and explore a type of masking that we don't normally talk about in society. Because when it comes to Halloween, usually the masking that we do at Halloween is more of a masquerade style of masking, where we step into a role that isn't usually ourselves. We get a break from being ourselves to be something else for a while. This is another type of masking. This is the kind of masking where you have to hide who you are, because if you don't, you will be hurt. And in this instance, there's an escalation happening with the dead against the living. But the fear of being hurt is now becoming a fear of being killed. And that's a different type of masking. And that ties into people who are dealing with autism. I don't know what other types of neurodivergent names, or you want to call it.
Sure.
But these are people who have to hide something about themselves, because if they don't, they'll be bullied or something of that nature. This story gave me an opportunity to explore that and go into a character who is ambivalent about stepping out into the world and being seen and enjoying the safety of being in the shadows of her mask.
Was that always your intention with Esther, struggling to take off the mask and how that would disrupt her world as the world that she finds herself in and her connections to people? Was that always sort of the back of your mind, or was that something that was a natural evolution for you while you were writing it?
I think it was a natural evolution. It's hard to say. The writing process is a funny creature because you can start off with an intention and then you get into the process of writing something and then you're like, that intention's not going to work. There's this other stuff that's happening that's a lot more interesting. And I always find too, I lay the groundwork for a story down, the basic blocks. Okay. And then I go in and find ways to make it more, like I added all these characters in as Esther's friends. And then when you lay down the groundwork and you get that first draft done, you go in and you take those relationships with each other and you find ways to create more tension in the story. There's this kind of implied or inferred romance between certain characters in the story that wasn't there in the initial draft. That tension helped make the characters more human, more deep, give them more depth. And it really tied, and of course the trick is to make sure it ties into the main character's story arc.
Right.
That is in a way because she is struggling to be seen. She's kind of in the shadow of her best friend she's a cheerleader, she is very fashionable, puts herself out there. So she's in the shadow of her best friend, and she doesn't mind. She doesn't mind that she is. But when you're there and you're trying to make a connection with someone else and your best friend's in the way, that's a problem. That I think really worked out well for the story and showing Esther's kind of conflict, her inner conflict and her inner struggle with being seen and not being seen.